Today, we are going to be looking into what it's actually like being a Christian in Japan. Christianity only makes up 1% of the population in Japan. So, to better understand what it's like living as a Christian in Japan and to better understand Christianity within the context of Japanese culture, I was able to talk with Pastor Victor from the Potter's House Church in Tokyo to get his perspective on the challenges Christianity faces in Japan. So, Nikkei Canadajin here, and today we have a very special guest joining us. So, Pastor Victor Alonso from Potter's House Church, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for going to give your perspective about Christianity, what it's like being a pastor, and what it's like being a Christian in Japan. And again, thank you so much for coming on. So first off, I know we were talking about this a little bit before as well in a previous conversation, but I found like your story of how you came to Christ extremely impactful, and I think that'll be a good starting point for this conversation.
So I've been a Christian since I was 22, I guess. And the way that I got saved was I was raised in a Catholic church. So my parents were Catholic. Yep. We used to go to Catholic church. And so I knew a lot about God. I knew all the stories, Abraham and all of that. But I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't really know God. It wasn't important to me. It was just what we did on Sunday.
Okay.
And so as soon as I got out of the house, I quit going to church. And so I was in a band. I was a bass player in a rock and roll band. And so me and my girlfriend ended up in Austin, Texas. And she was involved. Well, we were all living in this hotel because we couldn't find a place. We couldn't find a place to rent because Austin just didn't have any open housing. And so we were like this close to being homeless. We're like living in a hotel. And so me and the other guys that we were living with went to work in the morning. And after we got to work, the hotel that we were living in caught on fire and burned down. So she almost died. She woke up and smelled smoke. And so she called the front office and said, "Hey, what's going on? I smell smoke." And they said, "You have to get out of the building. The building's on fire." Oh, so she opened the door and there was flames coming over the balcony. We were on the third floor. And so by the time she ran out of the room and ran down to the parking lot, our room was on fire and burned to the ground. So, so she was freaked out. We lost everything that we owned. She found out she was pregnant that day because she was throwing up. At first, they thought it was like smoke inhalation, like she just. But turns out she was pregnant. That's with my son, and so that was like a really hard day, So we lost everything that we owned, and we found out that we were pregnant, and so we called for some help. And my cousin. I had a couple of cousins and an aunt that lived in San Antonio, which is about an hour away. Okay. This is all in Texas. And so she comes to Austin to pick us up. And my cousin is this just Bible thumping Christian. And she's like, "You need to get saved." And I'm like, "I kind of think I need a house, maybe some money, I'm not sure that Jesus is going to really like cover me for dinner. And so we argued about it. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was like, "I'm going to get saved." And the reason she wanted to do that was because she almost died. Okay. And so she's like, "If I had died, there's no way I was going to go to heaven. And so I don't want to go to hell." And I'm just like, we just need a little more time. We just need to work it out. And we argued until about 3:00 that morning with my cousin. And I went to sleep. There's two cousins. There's a brother and sister. And so we were staying with a brother. So we slept on his oak floor and, like with blankets, and a pillow. So the mattress was an oak floor. And we slept about 5 hours because those guys got up at some kind of ungodly early time in the morning, like 7.
Oh, geez.
And so but in that 5 hours of sleep, I got more. That house was peaceful, and so I really had some restful sleep. My house, it was like party central and crazy, and kind of slept with one eye open, and it was never chill, never relaxed. It was
Okay.
always something going on. So anyway, they took me to church, and when I was, in church, I was kind of an atheist. I didn't really believe in God. I didn't know if God
Mm.
was real. I knew that I had grown up in church, but I didn't know if any of that was real. And so the pastor was like, "How many here need help?" And I was like, "Well, I need some help." And because all I own are these clothes. And he says, "Well, why don't you come up?" And so I came up, and he led me in a prayer, but
Oh,
I know what I said in my heart. I know he led me.
yeah.
I said something, but what I said in my heart was like, "Okay, God, if you're real, then I'm gonna try to do like what you want me to do, and and then we'll see how it goes,
Mhm.
and we'll do that for a year, and then we'll reevaluate." So what, I thought I was being quite magnanimous, like I'll try this for a year.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, my girlfriend and I were married. We had a son. I was in college. We weren't homeless. My life was much better. And I said, "Oh, well, you know, that was pretty good. Let's see if you can do it again." So I
Okay.
re-upped, for another year. And so my wife and I had been married 27 years, and coming up on 28, it'll be 28
2018.
soon.
Wow.
And so, and God has been better than his word. And so it's just been tremendous. So I've never gone back on that. It's been the best decision of my life. I made two really good decisions in my life. I got married and I got saved. And so,
Wow.
so that's how I came to Christ.
That's a really impactful story, especially about, I would say, like, just how everything around you kind of was, it's so chaotic in that time you trusted in faith and just
Man,
believed, just kept on
I,
going forward.
and
Wow.
it wasn't a smooth transition. I'm cutting out all of the parts where I'm really stupid about stuff. So
Fair enough.
I
Yeah.
wasn't an easy convert. It wasn't like, okay, I'm just going to serve God now. I was just like, it was like pulling teeth. But it was very, very obvious that what God had planned for my life was way
Mm.
better than what I had planned for my life.
That,
Which is probably a pretty good transition about how did I find myself here.
wow. Again,
Yeah.
that's just an extremely impactful story for that.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope if anybody's listening out there and you're like, I need help, let God help you,
Yeah,
because he will. Yeah.
that's definitely a great message. And just kind of going based off of that as well, because like right now you're in Japan and you're the pastor for the Potter's House Church right now.
Yep.
So how did that come about? And more specifically, why Japan as opposed to like going, there's so many different countries you could have probably
Yeah.
chosen from. Why Japan? What made you drawn to Japan in your
Well,
estimation?
we had a friend of mine that was here, and he came and asked us to do an impact team, just kind of like do a mission trip, come to Japan, help him out. And so we came. We brought like 25 people. We did a concert. My wife sings. I play guitar. And so we did this concert, and a whole bunch of people came, and it was a good thing. And we were here for about 10 days, and it was
Okay.
cool. Like we saw that there was a tremendous need
Hmm.
for the gospel here in Japan. We saw people were really hurting and really kind of open. And we did this concert and stuff, and then we flew home, because I
All
was
right.
pastoring a church in Kansas.
Yeah.
And so on the way home, what I was thinking was like, well, thank God that's over with, you know. And my wife leans over to me and she goes, "I could live there."
Huh.
And I told her on the plane, I'm just like, that'll never happen. And she goes, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I can't imagine the circumstances that would have to take place that we would end up in Japan. That just doesn't make any sense."
Hmm.
So that was in April. And so
Okay.
we moved here in November and took over the church. So what happened is that they brought that pastor home, the pastor that was a friend of mine, and he was like, he was ready to go back home. He needed somebody to take his place, and we had a really good impact. And so
Okay.
they asked us if we would be willing to come and take over the church, and we said yes. This was not on my, like, I'm not into anime. I'm not
Mhm.
into, Pokemon. I don't know what any of that stuff, just,
Yeah.
I'm not like a Japanese fanboy at all. I like their guitars and their samurai
Mhm.
swords and like, soba basically. And so, but we
Wow.
could see the need. And so we came, and that was 3 years. It's been about 3.5 years that
Three
we've
and a
been
half
here.
years now. Wow,
Yeah.
that's great to
Yeah.
hear. So it's like
Yep.
kind of that's very interesting because like it's kind of like a calling card for you to come to Japan
Yeah.
with everything that happened with your friend and the
Yeah.
timing of it as well.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
yeah, we had about a year before COVID hit and shut everything down for 2 years. So,
Jeez.
I mean, of the 3 years we've been here, 2 years of it has been like, don't go anywhere, don't bring anybody to your house, don't do anything, COVID. So now it's really good to see things kind of opening up and people getting out more. And so,
Yeah, I can
yeah.
definitely
So
imagine for that. And just kind of going based off of that as well, I'm curious for yourself, since you've been in Japan for, you said, like over 2 years now. I'm curious in terms of Christianity, how it's practiced, or even something as simple as the worship place in Japan versus the
mm,
United States. Is there any major differences that you find?
everything's different. So this was a home church. That's the first time we've ever done that because real estate is so expensive in Tokyo. We're in
Okay.
Shinjuku, right? So I
Oh,
mean, just
wow. Yeah, that'd
everything
be
is
so
like,
expensive.
yeah. So we started out with a home church and we were doing Bible studies and church services here. We've never done that before. We always would rent a building and then you just drive people to the building.
Okay.
You have a
Yeah.
place and everybody goes there and you try to have a lot of stuff going on.
All right.
This was the opposite. This was like dealing with people and building a congregation before we had a building.
Wow.
And so some of our Bible studies will have like 15 or 17 people in them in like our living room. We eat dinner and have a Bible study. So everybody's kind of like, in the stairwell and just packed in. So it's very, very kind of communal, which is
Okay.
very different. I mean, we've always hung out and fellowship, but there's an intensity to that here that's not in the States.
Huh, that's very
You
interesting.
asked a question about like what's different about being a Christian here versus being a Christian in the States. When you tell somebody that you're a Christian here,
Yeah.
they have no idea what you're talking about because there's just not this underlying culture of Christianity. The United States, and you're from Canada, so
Yes.
they're all, Judeo-Christian culturally. And so even if you're not Christian, if I say, hey, you ought to come to church, or hey, God wants to help you, there's context.
Mm.
Here there's none of that context, but that's also been really, really cool because when you tell people about the gospel, they respond just exactly the way that people in the New Testament respond. I mean, they quote the people in the New Testament. I had
Okay.
a conversation with a guy and he goes, okay, preacher, what's the whole Bible in like 2 sentences? And I said, well, Jesus said that all of the law is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's it, right? Love God with all your
Hmm.
heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. There it is. And he thought about it and he goes, okay, well, who's my neighbor? And I said, wait. And I opened up the Bible and I showed him in the Bible where that conversation took place exactly like that.
All
Uh,
right.
another another time I was telling a guy that he had to get born again, and he's like, how can I get born again? I mean, it's like I'm a full grown man. My mom's smaller than me. I can't get born again. And I said, hang on. And I said, this conversation happened 2,000 years ago. Read it, and then we can talk. And so they respond exactly the way that people in the New Testament respond, because people are the same. They've always been the same.
Yeah,
So
that's a really interesting point that you bring up as well. It's kind of like, as opposed to like in Canada or United States, where like you said, there's already that, I guess, that cultural setting for Christianity. So the context is already understood. In Japan, it's like asking, like you said, all
it's
these
brand
new
new.
questions, everything's new.
Yeah,
They want to know
yeah,
everything. So
yeah.
would you say that's one of the, I guess, main characteristics that you found that's different in Japan is like
Yes.
all the questions that they ask, as
Yeah.
opposed to Canada or the States? Well,
Yeah,
that's really
the
interesting part.
questions are really good. There's just not this background knowledge. All of it is really good. It's very
Mhm.
honest. People are open. And so,
Oh, that's
yeah,
great to hear then.
yeah.
And I'm curious, just going based off of that for yourself, being a pastor in Japan, I'm curious now, what do you think are like kind of maybe if you could tell us like the three main challenges of being a pastor in Japan or just in general?
Hmm. So the main challenge of being a pastor here in Japan is just connecting with people. It's hard to meet people in Tokyo. Tokyo is so busy.
Oh,
People are
yes.
scheduled forever. I mean, it's just busy all the time. So you're like, hey, let's get together. And they're like in their phone scrolling, like, okay, so, maybe in August, and you're just like, August, man, it's like not even June yet. And they're like, yeah, it's busy. And, you can see their calendar and it's just packed.
Yeah.
So it's
Wow.
very, very busy. So, having, and the work culture here, I've always been a working pastor. So I own my
Mhm.
own business and ran a church.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I'm no stranger to 60, 70-hour weeks.
Yeah.
But the working culture here is nuts. People are, they work like too much, and so that's a problem. Um, the Another problem that or a challenge is just in the United States, or at least in the regions where
Mhm.
I was, people are open, and if you violate their trust, then they close.
Okay.
But you kind of have an open door. It's like, yeah, come on in, let's hang out. And then if you violate that relationship,
Mhm.
they're like, okay, I'm done with you. In Japan, like the door is closed, they'll crack it open a little bit, and they're just like, oh, I'll check you out for a bit. And the door opens really slowly, so you don't get to
Yeah.
know people quick. I think they're good friends once you get to be friends, but they're
Oh,
not
I see.
friends right out the gate. They're just like, I got to know you for about a year before I trust you. So that's a challenge.
Mhm.
And the way that we're dealing with that is that we're an open book. So we invite people to our house, which I found out was a big thing. We're like, yeah, come over for dinner. And they get formal and they'll bring presents. And,
Oh,
and it's
presents.
just like, no,
Wow.
it's just, well, they'll bring apples or fruit
Okay,
or
yeah.
something because it's like very formal, right? All of a sudden it's like a big deal. And we're just like, no, just come over. We're going to have like, I don't know, something. We'll eat something. And so that's been a difference. I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's definitely
Okay.
different. Yeah.
That's really interesting because you kind of touch on how, like, in the States, people are more open first, more trusting than if you do anything to violate that trust, then they're kind of become more closed.
Yeah.
Well, in Japan, it takes a lot longer to build that relationship where they're more guarded at first. But I think
Yes.
your approach is really good. Like you said, being an open book and just welcoming everyone and just being transparent. I think that's a great way to handle that.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to blend in. I mean, there's nothing that I can do to look more local. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm 187 centimeters tall and weigh 100 kilograms. So I'm like one and a half Japanese people, and so I don't blend in. So I don't, the last thing that they need is for me to be like the last samurai, and be Tom Cruise and go down the street wearing,
Oh, okay.
and just be all, with my top knot and
Yeah.
I'm just like, that's not going to fly. Right. It just would look like a parody. And so I'm just myself and I'm pretty good at that. So that's that's all we're
Uh,
trying to do.
that's
Yeah.
great to
Just,
hear.
just love people.
Oh, that's a great message as well.
Yeah.
And going based off of that, based off of loving people as well, because I know as a Christian, you're told, like you said before, to love your neighbor.
Mm.
I'm curious, just kind of going into, I guess more of the sense going into what it's like being a Christian in Japan.
Mhm.
In general, what do you think are like once again are the like kind of the three main challenges of being a Christian in Japan versus being a Christian in the States, for example?
The thing that's hard about being a Christian is that we just are terrible at it, right? So being a Christian basically boils down to doing God's will instead of your will, and you have to make the decision to do that every day. If you're honest, probably several times a day, and so that's not any different.
Mhm.
So the the culture here doesn't have an undercurrent of Christianity. So when you tell people that you're a Christian, they look at you kind of weird.
Oh,
Just
okay, I
like,
see what you
you
mean.
know,
It's like, what kind of
that's,
context is this in? It's like, what
yeah,
kind of
like,
person
you
are
know,
you?
yeah. And so, and then they watch you a little bit, but
Hmm.
that's fine. I think, I haven't found it harder. I'm probably not the guy to ask because I've been a Christian for 27 years and I have my wife and my daughter here. And so we're kind of a unit,
Okay.
you can take this unit, that's what family is supposed to be, right? It's
Yeah.
a family is a brick. It's the brick that society's built out of.
Hmm.
And so this brick is self-supporting and self-cohesive, and it supports itself and maintains itself. The entire world can be against it, but if this unit is holding together, a husband and wife and family, children, then that brick can endure even in terrible circumstances or in really, really bad situations because it's cohesive, it stays
Yeah.
together. So I have that. And you could take us anywhere. You could drop us in India or put us in Africa or put us in China or where, pick a spot on the map, throw a dart at it, and we'll be okay because there's God at the head of it, me, my wife, my children, and we're all just like a little functioning unit that you can put anywhere.
Okay, so you have like that support behind you, the support
Yeah.
network. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great to hear,
Yeah.
Fred.
So none of that. And then, maybe it's a personality thing is that I'm not sensitive to I think that there are people that influence other people and people that are
Yeah.
influenced by other people. And I've always been enough of an egotist to be like, this is what I'm doing, and I just do my thing. And
Okay, so you do what you believe in.
yeah. And I've always been like that. When I was a sinner, I was doing that. I mean, so it's not always been a positive thing in my life. It's
Okay.
so I'm not that influenced by externals.
Oh,
As
fair
long
enough.
as my
Yeah.
entire internal relationships are cool, I'm good.
Fair enough there. How about,
Yeah.
because I'm sure like you have your own congregation that you're in
Mhm.
your own community.
Mhm.
I'm assuming like for that congregation, it's more of a mixture between, I guess, between Japanese people and foreigners
Everybody.
as well. I'm curious though, like coming out as a Christian, whether it's like in your workplace or anything like that, really, do you find that that's, if you say that, oh, I'm a Christian, or that for people in general, that they act in such a way that's like, they're indifferent, or is it more like, oh my gosh, wow.
I think so a big reaction from people is hard to get no matter what, right here in Japan. So hardly anybody goes, I mean, you might get, and that's they're freaked out, right? That their mind's blown if you get that. So I think what's going on is that it's a much bigger deal for the people that are Japanese that get saved and convert and start coming to church. I think that's a bigger deal. Right?
Okay, I'm curious, why do you think that's a bigger deal for the Japanese person to
Japan prides itself on being secular. It prides itself on being officially atheist, which is very interesting to me because I've never been in a place with so many temples and shrines.
I see what you mean there.
Right. So you're walking down the street and you're just like, oh yeah, we're atheists. We're completely, secular and materialist. Oh, here's a shrine. There's a temple. There's another shrine. There's, and you go down the street and there's just shrines and temples everywhere. But it reminds me of when I was a Catholic, because what those things represent is, well, that's kind of just what we do.
Okay.
Those are things, those are edifices toward God, but I don't really know God. I don't have a relationship with him. It doesn't impact me. So that's what I mean by saying I'm an atheist. So when somebody gets saved and they start serving God, and then they have to be all like, no, this is important to me.
All right.
And people are like, are you okay? I mean, you have a good job. You went to a good school. You're making good money. What's wrong with you? Well, I'm miserable. I've done everything right and I'm still not happy. I've bought all of the new toys. I've got my house is full of the latest gizmos and gear, but I'm still not happy, you know? So what do you do if you've done everything right and you're still not happy? Why do you think alcohol is such a problem in Japan?
I guess it'll be an outlet for like you said, for unhappiness or
Yeah,
whatever they're lacking.
yeah, yeah. It's an excuse to get everything off of your chest. You know, I haven't had anything to drink alcoholic in, you know, more than 2 decades. And it's not like I miss it because I'm just happy now. Before then, I was miserable. I was just miserable in my own skin. So I had to drink in order to have a good time. Like if there was no booze, I couldn't have fun.
Okay.
Right. So that was the social lubricant that allowed everything to happen. But now I'm happy. And so we can have fun sober and I don't regret it the next day. So
yeah, no hangover, no negative effect the next day.
Yeah, I'm good. You know, I'm fat, but it's not because I have a beer belly. I'm just fat because I like food. You know, so,
but that's interesting though. Like going back to the concept, like for a Japanese person, like you said, who's becoming a Christian and like kind of sharing that with their friends or family, and like you said in your experience, like the response is kind of more like, oh, what's wrong? What happened? Why are you doing this if everything else in your life is going so great? Why do you need this? That's very interesting to me for that.
The external part can be going good, but the internal part can be broken.
Very
right?
nice there.
Yeah. So everything on the surface can be good, but the internal is not satisfied. You know, everybody wants to be loved.
Oh, definitely.
Everybody wants to have a meaningful life. Everybody wants to have connection and community and feel like their life counts for something. And a lot of people give their lives to companies that don't care. I mean, you're just a cog.
You're easily replaceable.
Yeah. And they let you know. They let you know that, you know, because God forbid they would come and say, hey, you're doing a great job. We can't replace you because you'll probably ask for a raise. You know, so they just don't. And so they just work you until you die. And it's very obvious to people that that's what's going on. And that's pretty miserable. But the gospel is that God loves you individually. You know, the Bible says that God loves you so much that you're the apple of his eye. That's a great kind of word picture because it's like if I got close enough to the camera, you could see the camera in my pupil. That's what it's talking about. That God holds you so close that you can see your reflection in his eye, the little man of the eye. That's what it really is. And so that's how much God loves you. He never loses track of you. He doesn't forget you. And you can have that relationship with God.
So that's really interesting because you're talking about like a loving relationship with God, how it's very positive. But like, as you said, like in Japan, and this is my next question I want to talk about as well, is that because Japan is so secular and because people kind of associate religion with, for example, with cults, for example, I'm curious, like for yourself as a Christian, as a pastor, what would you say to those people who kind of view as a cult, and how would you go about changing that perspective?
Okay. So cults have some defining characteristics. One of the defining characteristics is that they're controlling. So they want to cut you off from talking with your friends and family, right? So the only person that you can talk to is the cult leader. So that's one. The door to our church is open. You can come, you can not come, you can leave. All of that is, you know, we don't, you know, you don't have to buy your appliances from us. You know what I mean? So there's that. The other thing is that everybody worships something. So the idea that you're going to be in a position where you don't worship anything is not right. You can tell what you worship by the one thing in your life that everything else bows down to is what is king in your life. It's the thing that you worship. So if everything bows down to work, or everything bows down to your relationship, or everything bows down to getting money or having relationships or partying or whatever it is, that's the thing that's God in your life. And so what we're trying to do is give people information, right? Okay. When I was learning about Japan, I learned that Japan was a big tea culture place, right? tea, right? I'm into guitar, so I went to Ochanomizu and I found out that that was water for tea. Apparently that's good water that you can make tea out of. And so it also is like where all the guitar shops are. So, Starbucks seems to be doing okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. You can see a Starbucks from a Starbucks. I mean, like they're right there. It's a dead race to see if there's more temples and shrines than Starbucks is in Tokyo. And so that's a Western thing that was formed in Seattle, Washington, and drinking coffees and is like a quintessentially American thing. And so all we're doing is giving people choice.
Okay.
We're just saying, hey, check this out, right? Before you write off religion or particularly Christianity, you should study it because you're building your life on faith, whether you realize it or not. So if you believe that there is no God, that nothing matters, you build a life on that. That's the way you build. That's why cult comes before culture. So every society is following some cult.
Huh. It's an interesting perspective on that.
Well, cult is the root word of culture, right? Culture is a derivative of cult. What you think about God builds the society that you live in, which makes perfect sense.
I could definitely see that.
So all we're doing is saying, hey, there's, you may want to consider this cult in the proper sense, not, my particular cult of personality. But the other thing that keeps us from being a cult, Christianity, like truly Christianity, is you have a Bible. So I tell you to turn in your Bible to this scripture. I read that scripture. I kind of explain what it says. But, you guys are smart and people are smart. So it's not like I'm going to be like, when it says love your neighbor, it means love the people of this church and hate everybody that doesn't go to this church. That's not what it says.
You don't get to interpret it, reinterpret it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it says. So this is what we need to do, and that's a proof against me modifying it.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think that's a good question. You should be skeptical, but be skeptical of secularism too, because purely secular societies, Russia and China were great examples. They said, we've had religious wars. We're going to get rid of religion. We're going to be officially atheist, and 100 million people died. Maybe not such a good track record.
That's definitely true. I think like if you don't have faith in like a God, for example, then you'll have like you said, something will replace it, which
absolutely,
if it's man-made, then it's going to be even worse.
It's going to be worse. Right. Because God says, love me with all your heart, mind, and strength. And then because you love me, love everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And just kind of going off of that as well, in regards to Christianity, in regards to congregation as well, I'm curious, like you said, you're very open, you're very transparent, which is great to hear. But how do you get more people to join the community? And more than that, how do you get them to stay within the congregation?
So there's two main struggles. The first struggle is, how do you tell people? And so I'm not above doing anything. So I think you got handed a flyer. Somebody gave you a flyer.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have flyers and we pass them out. And I know that in Tokyo, everybody's got flyer fatigue because you're giving people like a recycling project because they can't throw it away anywhere. And so they're just like, oh, flyer, and they carry it home. But it brought us this conversation. So it's worth doing, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing is, how do we tell people and how do we connect people? And so we do that any way that we can. We'll busk on the street corner. Me and my wife will sing and play just to slow people down and invite people to church. It's not because we think we're good. It's just we're loud. And so that's one way. Personal relationships are the best way. Get to know somebody and invite them to church. Everybody's an evangelist for whatever they're into. Mm-hmm. If you like a new band, you're going to tell everybody, hey, you should check this band out. I mean, we all do that. So evangelism is the easiest thing in the world to do if you're excited about what you're doing. The second thing is an internal struggle that person's got to decide.
Okay.
Right. And so they have to evaluate in their own life, whether or not they're going to trust God. That's one aspect, and obey God. So people leave the church because of both of those reasons. Either they don't trust God, or they understand what God is asking for and they're like, I'm not going to do that. And then those people leave, right? A pastor's job is to hold people in the presence of God long enough for them to develop their own relationship with him. That's what it is. So my job is to just kind of keep people in the presence of God until they have a personal relationship themselves. And then revelation takes care of so much stuff. Because once you understand that God knows you personally, the rest of it becomes relationship and not religion.
Okay.
That's what we're going for.
That's really interesting. So, like you said at the start, there's so many different ways to kind of like bring people into the church, whether it's through music, whether it's through personal connections, whether through just something as simple as handing out a flyer. I think those are all great ways to bring people in the church. And like you said, kind of let them decide for themselves. We talked about a little bit about how you can get people to come to the church, to come be a part of the congregation, of the community. What I'm curious though is, how do you get them to stay? Like, what kind of different aspects or things can you do as a pastor to kind of build that trust with your congregation?
So, because for so long we were just a home church, everything was literally done in our house. And so Bible studies, we would have a meal together starting at 7:00.
Okay.
That wasn't like kindness or planning. It's just, we noticed that people were coming straight from work and they were coming hungry. And so it was just meeting a need. It was very apparent that they hadn't eaten dinner. They would show up eating kombini food, or a little, like they'd be walking up the stairs with a bento or something. And so my wife and I were like, we should cook a meal. We have time, we can prepare. And so, we love entertaining people anyway. So we would feed them a big meal. And so we would eat from 7:00 till 8:00. And then the Bible study would start at 8:00 and then go till 9. And then everybody just fellowships and hangs out. And because it was in the house, it was really very casual and very informal. So Sunday mornings when we would have church, we would arrange the furniture so that it looked like a church, but it was still pretty informal. It's still my living room. There's half the people are sitting in the dining room chairs. The other half are sitting on the couch, So when we got the new building a couple of months ago, the formality of it increased. So we have like a proper church building with a pulpit and chairs, and it looks like a church service. But we wanted to keep the community. So we're still doing the Bible studies at our house. And after church, everybody comes over to the house and we eat together.
Oh, that's great to hear.
So if you read in the Bible, most of Jesus's teaching with his disciples was done over food. So he would break bread with them and they would talk about things. And if you think about it, that's how families work. They eat together and they discuss the day and they talk. And there's a wonderful warmth about that. And so we do an awful lot of fellowship. We'll do church trips. We'll all go together someplace and go check it out and take pictures and all of that. But really what it is it's just a family. And one of my favorite verses is out of Psalms. It says that God takes the solitary and puts them in families.
That's great.
It's great.
It
right?
is.
And so Japan is one of the loneliest places I've ever lived, and we're living in the biggest city that's ever existed.
So biggest busiest.
How can you be alone with 38 million people running into you? Well, that's probably why. It's because there's so many people, you just kind of shut down. The next time you're in the subway or in the metro, watch people. Everybody has headphones on. Everybody's looking at their phone or reading a book, and they're just isolated. They're just like, you could be squashed against them and they'll pretend like you're not there. They're just like, I'm in my own little box. You don't look at anybody, and you're just kind of like alone.
Hmm.
in a city of millions. And so what we do is we see people, we see them, and we get to know them personally. You're not just the dude in my way. You're my brother in Christ. Yeah. And so, it's not like the family is fully functional, because I've got my problems and you have your problems. And there is that friction. I mean, it's just like any other family, right?
That's true.
But it is family.
Okay. I am curious though, just going back a little bit on that. You said in order to create and strengthen those relationships within that family, within that congregation, that you have like, for example, dinners, you have outings, which is really great to hear for that. I'm curious though, for those kinds of activities, because I know for yourself, for your congregation, you said it's a mixture, right? Japanese and I guess foreigners as well. How does that work for communication, or do you have separate groups, or I'm curious how does that work?
Everybody's really working hard. So we're translating the Sunday morning and Sunday evening services. And so the guy that's doing the translation has been here for 6 years, and he's from Estonia.
Okay.
Okay. And a lot of the people in the church that speak Japanese help him. So he's translating. I speak in English, and the common language, everybody speaks some English.
Okay.
But we've got representatives of Europe and China and Japan and America, and it's just one family. We don't have anything in common but Jesus. But Jesus is enough. Wow,
that's great to hear. So it's an effort on everyone's part to kind of come together.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear for that. And I'm curious though, like speaking of congregation though, I am curious because you're in Tokyo right now. What's the demographics like? Like, is it mainly young people coming to church, to your services, or is it more older people, or is it more 50-50?
It's all over the map. The gospel is a whosoever will gospel.
Oh.
I've gotten asked this question. It's a good question. I mean, I've been interviewed before, and this question has come up, and it's always just kind of confused me, because people will say like, well, what's the demographic of your church, or who are you going for?
Oh, I see what you mean.
And my answer is always like, well, people that want to go to heaven, that seems to be the only qualifying thing is that you are alive. That's important. You need to show up, and you want to go to heaven, and you want to know who Jesus is, and you want to serve God with people. And so you can be rich or poor or young or old or fat or skinny or whatever. It's a whosoever will. So that's what it is. We have people that are coming that are older than me and younger than me, and from all over the place, and none of that matters.
That's really interesting. So you have people who are, I guess, older in life, because I guess it's for my perception is that if you're older, then you're kind of more set in your ways. So you're kind of less likely to convert or try new experiences, as opposed to if you're younger.
Maybe. The other thing is that you're coming to the end of your life, and you want to make sure that you're forgiven. Older people realize the regrets that they have and the mistakes that they've made far more keenly than younger people. Younger people think there's still time. I'm 50, so I've lived most of my life.
Really, 50? You look really good for being 50, though.
It's the fat. The fat smooths out all the wrinkles. Yeah, so I'm older now. Like I'm not middle-aged. I'm over middle-aged. I'm not going to live to be 100. I'm not of Japanese descent. You guys can run to 120, but us guys don't. And so if I get another 30, 40 years, I'm going to be happy. Right. And so I've made some mistakes in my youth. Would I have some of that time back? You bet. But what that does is make me try to do what I'm doing now with all my heart. So I'm trying to utilize the time that I have. And I'm far more aware of it. And so young people are looking for direction, but older people are too. And so none of that matters. You ought to, when you read the Gospels, the people that were attracted to Jesus were all over the map. There were wealthy people and poor people and old people and young people, and there were Greeks and there were Jews, and they just, everybody. And so the way that Jesus would say it was, to him that has ears to hear, let him hear. He's like, I'm talking, but if you listen, you're qualified. Now you can come. Right? So everybody's invited. The church is made up of those that choose to go.
So there's no like specifically targeting a certain age group. It's just whoever wants to come can come.
That's right.
So like you said at the start, like you said at the start, you're very transparent, just open to anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're not cool enough to come to this church. Another church down the road. So, everybody that wants to come can.
Oh, that's really great to hear for that. And I know, sorry for going over time.
No, go for it.
Five more minutes, that'd be fantastic.
No, we take 15. It's cool. We're having a good conversation. That's great. Another thing that I want to say is that you don't have to be a Christian to come. You can come check it out. Come learn. Okay. So even if you are just curious about what Christianity is, come and you can ask me whatever question you want. I'm not easily offended.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah. So if you just have questions, you're like, okay, well, what about this and what about that? Yeah, come bring it.
Yeah, I think like you said at the start too, like for a lot of Japanese people who are coming to Christ, they ask so many different questions, like you're saying, maybe some of them are blunt, but I think like you said, it's very important to ask those questions. And
absolutely,
even if they're not a believer, that the first step is asking questions and kind of getting to know about it. So that's great to hear.
We're just giving people information. And so you're going to make the decision. I can't make it for you.
You're opening the door for it. You have to walk through.
That's right.
And I guess just kind of on the last section, just in general in Japan, what are like what are the three main things that kind of really surprise you? It doesn't have to be related to religion, just in general.
Okay. Putting the power line poles.
Yep.
In the street. That's weird. Right? So I live in Shinjuku, which is kind of an older part of the city. You could tell because the streets are very narrow. And so there's no sidewalks on the side of the street. And they put the phone poles that carry all the power lines in the street. Right? So they're not like in the United States, there's a road and sidewalks and then the power lines and then a yard and then the house. This is like there's a house, the street, and in the street is a phone pole, right? So the cars have to go around the phone poles like that. That was weird. The recycling regimen took us forever to figure out, like, glasses and then plastic and then trash and then burnable and what's burnable and what's not. And then being rebuked by the garbage people. So it's like, you did that wrong. So here's a sticker and all your neighbors know you're stupid. And you're like, okay.
I'm curious, like for that one, do you actually, I know in some cities, you actually have to sign your name on the garbage bag. Is it like that where you live?
Ours are right in front of our house. And so everybody knows who did it.
Yeah,
we don't have we don't have a communal garbage spot. It's like right in front of my house. And if I get it wrong, they're like,
wow, I have not seen that before. Like where I've lived in the past, like right now it's a lot more strict because I'm living in Chiba right now. You have to sort of like through containers, like everything like you just said, except we have like a little communal place where we can just throw it out. And before Chiba, I lived in Shizuoka. I was just like really relaxed. Like you can throw like the plastics and the burnables. It's just
whatever.
But like, that's really interesting to hear. It's like right in front of your house. So everyone knows if you made a mistake.
You
did it.
Yeah. And so that was, it took me a minute to get a hold of that. The fact that inviting somebody over to your house or going over to their house is such a big deal. And it makes sense after you kind of learn about it, but it doesn't make sense coming from the States. In the States, we're always going over to everybody's house.
Oh yeah. You have like house parties, house gatherings.
Yeah. Hey, come over for lunch. And it's not a big deal. Here, if you're like, hey, come over for lunch, it's just like, well, I'm not dressed right. And you're like, what are you talking about? You're here, you know. But it makes sense because I've been in apartments and I've been in some houses where, you know, there's not, you walk through the room, or if you live in an LDK or something, you know, it's not like there's a living room area and a kitchen and a dining room. It's kind of like you are in the private space of the house. And so that makes sense, because when you invite somebody over, I mean, you can't hide anything. You're literally in their room.
You're showing off all your personal belongings,
Yeah,
items.
yeah. It's just that's a much more intimate gathering. You know, like it would be weird if you went to somebody's house in the States and the first thing they did was take you into a bedroom.
Yeah,
you know, you'd be like, what's going on here? But that's kind of what this is in Japan, right? Because people's houses are so small, so the whole thing's kind of the bedroom.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I found interesting. Now, look, culture. Let's talk about that for a second. I'm Mexican. I'm a second generation Mexican that grew up in the United States. So my father was an immigrant. I was born in the States. My wife is from St. Croix. She's Black.
Wow.
My kids are multiracial, right? We've pioneered churches or pastored churches in Colorado and in Kansas, and now here in Tokyo. And so culture to me has always been funny or interesting. It's never been divisive, right? It's like, oh, because you do that, then, you know, you're weird or dumb or whatever. That's never been the case. It's always been like, oh, how do you guys solve that common problem? Oh, that's interesting. We do it this way. You guys do it that way. Okay, that's neat. And so so that's been a real benefit to me, because there's so much culturally different. But most of it is just interesting to me.
Okay.
You know, I just find it kind of like, oh, okay. And it's not like there's not reasons for it. One thing that's weird is Japanese people will, when they take off their shoes, they'll spin them around so that they face the door and like park them.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and so like we take off our shoes, but we just throw them all kind of piggly in the thing. And then I noticed that they park the cars the exact same way. They back the car up. So it's just like, man, you guys like park your shoes and your car, everything's facing out, you know. And this Japanese guy that came to church started laughing, goes, I never thought of that. Maybe that's why we park our cars like that. I was just like, I bet, you know, because they always put their shoes, you know, nice and tight.
Always backing in.
Yeah, it's always backing in. You know, and Americans hardly ever back in. We park nose in.
Oh yeah, same in Canada for that too.
Yeah. So yeah, and so I was just like, why go through the trouble? It's like, oh, it's so much easier to leave. And I'm like, yeah, but it's so much harder to park. You know? So anyway, so those were interesting things.
That's interesting, especially about like the backward shoes. I could totally see that now too. You know, next time my Japanese friends come over, I'm gonna see if they do that.
They all do it.
I'm pretty sure they all do.
They all do it. That is, if you want to stick out like a gaijin, just throw your shoes there like that, and they'll all look at you like, you don't got it. Man.
Why?
Yeah, you're not there. So that's interesting. Yeah, so there's been some stuff. You know, the food here is better. The quality is better. The portions are smaller.
I'm curious about the portions, because you're from the US. Do you think is that a good thing in your estimation, or
you know, I weigh 97 kilograms, right? So
it's all muscle though. All muscle, right?
Yeah. All of it, right? So, you know, just that little bento is not gonna, you know, the first time I got served at a restaurant, I was like,
where's the second half? The second half is coming, right?
This is the appetizer, right? You know, I mean, and they're like, you can have more rice. And I'm like, rice? You know, I felt like that lady in the 80s. Where's the beef? You know, bring on the meat. But so I think it's probably better. I think we probably eat too much in the States, you know, because the food here, even though the portions are smaller, the food is of higher quality.
Okay. So it's like it's healthier for you.
Yeah, I think so. So I lost about 10 pounds when I got here.
Just from the portion sizes alone?
Yeah, the portion sizes, and probably walking, because we don't have a car. So we take public, that's a new thing.
Oh,
public transportation.
Yeah, I can imagine for that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your time, though.
You're welcome.
One last thing, just a quick speed round. So
Okay.
the first answer that comes to your mind, just blurt it out. Does that sound good?
This is where you get in trouble. Go for it.
Okay. Favorite food,
Soba.
favorite book,
Book. Probably Mere Christianity.
okay. And if you could have a superpower, what superpower would it be?
Flight.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
And let me know in the comment section down below what your biggest takeaway was. And also, if you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself, I'm going to be linking the Potter's House Church in the description box down below. So if you're in Japan, if you're in Tokyo, then you definitely want to check them out. And finally, if you're looking to learn Japanese, then check out my free Japanese cheat sheet. Inside are the 5 things I wish I had known when I was first getting started out. And you can find that in the description box down below as well. And until next time, everyone, stay waku waku.